In 1957, two men in Paris tried to map a city by emotion using what they called psychogeography, the study of how places make you feel. The map they made is, by any reasonable standard, useless. You couldn't navigate with it. You couldn't even find your hotel. And yet it may be the most quietly influential map of the 20th century, because it was the first map that didn't try to show you where things were. It tried to show you how they felt. And 50 years later, every navigation app on your phone follows the same logic. The map is called the Naked City. The men were Debord and Asger Jorn. They belonged to a small, argumentative, mostly broke group of artists and writers called the Situationist International, and they believed something almost nobody else in Europe took seriously at the time: that a city could be measured by emotion. That the corner where you slowed down without knowing why, the alley that felt heavy, the square that suddenly made you want a drink, these were not random. They were geography. And someone needed to draw them. This is the story of how they tried, and of why their theory of unitary urbanism, the idea that you could design cities around feeling rather than function, ended up shaping how we navigate today. What made the Naked City so strange? What made it almost useless as a map? Was what wasn't on it. Most of Paris was gone. The Situationists drew only 19 irregular fragments, chunks of neighborhood mostly clustered on the left bank and around Les Halles, and left the rest of the city as blank paper. No streets, no metro lines, no landmarks. The Paris between the fragments simply wasn't there. Those fragments had a name. Debord called them unités d'ambiance, units of ambiance. Pockets of the city with a coherent emotional character. A unité might be 6 blocks, it might be 20. Its borders weren't determined by administrative boundaries. They were determined by feeling. When the feeling changed, when you crossed an invisible line and the air went different, that was the edge. Connecting them were red arrows. And those had a name too. Plaques, tournants, turntables. They marked the routes Debord and Jorn had found between the unities. Not direct routes, not efficient ones. The routes they had actually drifted along, dragged from one ambient zone to the next, often pulled by something they couldn't name. The arrows didn't always point both ways. Some unities you could leave but not return to, some you reached only by a single corridor. The whole thing was directional, almost like a circuit diagram. And the title, The Naked City, was lifted, without credit, from a 1948 American film noir of the same name, a procedural about a murder in New York. The film ends with the famous line, "There are 8 million stories in the Naked City." Debord took the title because the noir genre understood something the city planners didn't. That the urban environment is morally and emotionally uneven. That some streets are honest and some streets lie. That a city is a feeling before it is a place. So how do you make a map like this? You walk. For 5 years before the map appeared, Debord and his earlier group, the Lettres International, had been doing something they called the derive. The drift. The concept had been developed by Ivan Chicheglov in his 1953 text, Formulary for a New Urbanism. But starting in 1952, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, they would set out into Paris with no destination, no errand, no plan. They followed the city instead of using it. A side street that pulled the eye, they took. A square that radiated something. Boredom, threat, charm. They sat in. They drank, they argued, they took notes. The derive was not aimless. That's the common misunderstanding. It was an instrument. Each drift was supposed to be guided by what Debord called psychogeographical attraction. The gravity of certain places, the repulsion of others. You weren't supposed to fight the pull. You were supposed to record it. Some drifts lasted hours, others lasted days. There are accounts of situationists drifting from Friday night to Monday morning without leaving the Ile de la Cité, surviving on wine and cheap bread, mapping a single square kilometer in obsessive detail. By 1957, after years of this, certain patterns had emerged. The same handful of neighborhoods kept reappearing in their notes. Les Halles, the old streets around the Marais, the area near the Gare du Nord, the slope of Belleville, other areas, the bourgeois 7th arrondissement, the new HLM housing blocks and grand projets being thrown up on the city's edge. They refused to drift in at all. Those places, they said, were dead. The grid had killed them. The naked city is what happened when they sat down with their notebooks and tried to draw the conclusions. The 19 unities are where the drifts kept circling. The white space is the Paris they had walked away from. The arrows are the corridors they had actually traveled, plotted with the precision of a railway diagram. The map was not speculation. It was fieldwork. You might ask why this mattered. Why a group of 20-somethings, broken post-war Paris, would spend half a decade walking around taking notes about how streets made them feel. The answer is that they were furious. And what they were furious about was urbanism itself. Post-war Paris was being rebuilt. Haussmann's wide 19th century boulevards, designed in part to make barricades harder to build and crowds easier to police, were being supplemented by something newer and, to the Situationists, worse. The modernist housing block. The Ring Road, the planned satellite city. By the middle of the 1950s, the French state was demolishing entire working-class quartiers and replacing them with what Debord later called the desert of new towns. The old emotional fabric of the city. The kind of weird, dense, layered Paris that produced the drift in the first place was disappearing. To Debord, this wasn't an accident of bad design. It was the point. He believed that modern urbanism, the discipline of city planning itself, was a project to control the feeling of being in a city. The official map showed you streets, addresses, transit. It served the planner, the developer, the police. It showed you the city as infrastructure. What it deliberately hid was the city as experience. So the naked city was an attack. By drawing Paris as a constellation of moods rather than a grid of streets, the Situationists were arguing that emotion was the real infrastructure, and that whoever controlled the production of emotion in a city controlled everything. If you could map feeling, you could redesign feeling. And if you could redesign feeling, you could redesign the city against its planners. That's why they cared so much about a map almost nobody saw. It didn't work. Or at least, it didn't work the way they wanted it to. The Situationist International was always small. Across its 15-year existence, from 1957 to 1972, only about 70 people were ever members. Debord expelled most of them himself. The group's internal politics were brutal. Accusations, denunciations, splits over points of theory that even sympathetic readers struggle to follow. Key theorists like Raoul Vaneigem, author of The Revolution of Everyday Life, would eventually break with Debord over these very tensions. By the early 1960s, the visual artists were mostly gone, purged for being insufficiently revolutionary. By the late 1960s, the group was essentially Debord and a handful of allies. In May of 1968, when students and workers shut down Paris in the largest general strike in French history, the Situationists believed their moment had arrived. Their slogans went up on walls across the city. Sous les pavés, la plage, beneath the paving stones, the beach, ne travaillez jamais, never work. For a few weeks, it looked like the revolution they had been theorizing for a decade was actually happening. It wasn't. By June, the strike collapsed. De Gaulle held an election and won. The students went back to school. The factories reopened. Debord watched it end and concluded that the spectacle, his term for the whole apparatus of mediated, image-based modern life, had absorbed the revolt and sold it back as a youth culture trend. He would later develop this theory fully in his 1967 book, The Society of the Spectacle. He dissolved the group in 1972. He drank heavily for the rest of his life. In 1994, he shot himself. The naked city spent the next 2 decades in art history footnotes. A few hundred lithographs had been printed. Most were lost. The map was a curiosity, proof that some clever Parisians had once tried something interesting and failed. And then, slowly, the world started to look like it. Take your phone out. Open any app you use to navigate the city you live in. Yelp doesn't show you streets. It shows you a city sliced into fragments and labeled by mood. Cozy, lively, romantic, hidden gem, dive bar, date night, family friendly, whole neighborhoods compressed into emotional tags. Between the fragments, the streets where there's nothing to recommend, the map goes quiet. You don't see them, or rather, you see them, but they have no content. They are for the app, white space. Google Maps reviews work the same way. So do the vibe filters in food and travel apps that have proliferated over the last few years. Surface a neighborhood by atmosphere, by intensity, by aesthetic. Strava's global heat map shows cities as the lines runners and cyclists actually choose, and shows the streets they avoid as ghosts. Tinder filters by neighborhood reputation. Airbnb tags listings by ambient character. The entire genre of TikTok videos labeled walking through a neighborhood is, if you squint at it, a derive. A drift through a unité d'ambiance, recorded for an audience. Every one of these tools is a naked city. They take a city and break it into fragments. They label those fragments by feeling. They draw arrows between the ones the algorithm has decided you'll want to move between, and the streets in between, the ones with no rating, no review, no tag. They make those streets disappear. The Situationists wanted to overthrow this. They believed that mapping the emotional character of a city was a revolutionary act, a way of revealing what urbanism hid, and reclaiming the city for the people who lived in it. What actually happened is more interesting and more bleak. The technology of emotional mapping arrived almost exactly the way they imagined it. The politics did not. The red arrows on Debord's map, the plaques torn on pulling drifters between zones of ambience, are now the blue dot on your phone, pulling you between zones of attention. The Unitist Ambiance are now neighborhoods with star ratings. The white space, the streets the Situationists removed because they were banal, is now the streets the recommendation engine has decided to remove because they are low engagement. The naked city didn't fail, it just got privatized. The original lithograph of the naked city hangs now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's catalogued under drawings and prints. A small, framed object on a white wall. Debord, who spent his entire life arguing that the spectacle would consume any radical gesture and turn it into wall art, would have recognized this exactly. He would have hated it, and he would have been right. But there's something the catalog card doesn't say. The map didn't fail because it was wrong. It failed because it was correct. The Situationists looked at the city and saw it as a constellation of moods, connected by emotional gravity, and they were right. We see it that way now. We just don't get to draw the map ourselves. Somebody else draws it, and we follow the arrows. That's the legacy of two men walking around Paris with a notebook and a bottle of wine. In 1957, trying to take feeling seriously enough to put it on paper. The city you live in is now a naked city. The only question left is whose city it is.